meeting back to order. Is that all right? You ready? Okay, so Denise is going to do some board training for us for privacy and security of, oh, Dan, are you here? I'm sorry.
I am, yeah.
Okay, all right. Privacy and security of personal information.
Madam Chair, members of the board, it has not been all that long ago that you looked at this policy. We did some modifications to this policy a year or so ago. Excuse me. But this is one of the policies that we have that comes up for periodic staff training, and we actually did this board meeting because next board meeting you will see substantial additional proposed policy and procedures in the arena of document management. John's not here right now, but later on in this board meeting we'll go over our incident response plan. And after the 2015 legislative session and the changes to the records management, records and information management requirements for state agencies, all of these things are sort of going to be brought together. I mean, we will have sort of one overarching policy and plan for records and information management that deals with security, retention, email policy, incident response and management and that sort of thing. So we thought since this policy was coming up for renewal, it would be a good place to sort of start and get everybody thinking about what you're going to see in August as well. So I don't know if any of you have experience with HIPAA in particular, but HIPAA sort of led to the sort of overarching, the purpose of a privacy policy is that you have to have you have to collect certain types of information to do the business that you do. You're entitled to collect it, but you have to manage it appropriately once it's in your possession. So, you know, privacy policies are always concerned with having the information accessible for business uses, managing the information so that it's accessible and used only by the people who need to have it for business purposes, and then protected against outside disclosure or improper use. So this is also training that all TRS staff go through as well. So this policy comes from a specific state statute, and I'm sure it's cross-referenced in here, 2-6-501 through 504. That went into effect, I want to say, probably 3 legislative sessions ago. I can even remember the legislator that offered the, but this is sort of the HIPAA parameters for state. This is related to personally identifiable information, which is information that is a name, a first name, part of a first name, a last name, in conjunction with another piece of data that makes the information identifiable as belonging to a particular individual. And those other pieces of information would be a social security number, a tax identification number, an identity protection personal identification number issued by the IRS. And I keep meaning to look up and find out what that really means, other than somebody who's in witness protection. I can't figure out what it might be, but a driver's license number, an identification number issued pursuant to state statute, and that the reference state statute is the state ID. If people don't have driver's licenses, they can still get a state issued identification through the Driver's License Bureau. A tribal identification number or enrollment number, an ID number issued by any state, the District of Columbia, or any of the commonwealths or possessions of the U.S. An account number, or credit or debit card number in combination with any required security code, access code, or password that would permit access to the person's financial account. And one of the changes that we last made to this was the inclusion of medical record information. We don't have medical records for health insurance purposes, but we do have medical records for disability determination purposes. So we would deal with those as well. We have the issue with our members come up frequently about social security numbers. Many of our forms require people to provide their whole social security number. And, you know, occasionally we will get somebody print on a form, I'm not giving you my social security number or something along those lines. We have to collect social security numbers for identification, for taxpayer identification purposes, for tax reporting purposes. So a number of our forms do require a full social security number. In the places where we can limit the social security number to the last 4 digits, we do that. But any form that pertains to a payment of benefits to a member, we still, for identification and tax reporting purposes, require the full social security number. So we do redact records where necessary. We limit access to information, particularly in our data system, by security settings to people who need to have access to that information. I will tell you that as small a shop as we are and as many hats as people wear internally, there's very little personal information of our members that is not accessible to most TRS employees. Pretty much, as far as I know, everybody has access to the FileNet system, to people's, because they need to, for purposes of doing their work at TRS. And so once again, you're allowed to do that as well. You make rational determinations about who needs to have access to information in order to perform their job duties and functions. And then you limit it along those lines, but you're not required to be irrationally sort of protective of information. You still have to do the business you have to do. So the policy portion of this policy essentially says those things. TRS is required to gather, maintain, and use and disclose personal information in the conduct of our business. We gather it, use it, maintain it, and disclose it only for those purposes. We collect full social security numbers only to the extent that we're required to. We redact information when it goes out of our building. We don't email documents with social security numbers or other protected information. In fact, the state of Montana has recently put a new filter on its email system that advises, that puts kind of a warning on an email that's attempting to be sent that includes information that may not be appropriate to be sent in an email. And primarily one of the things it looks for is numbers in the format of a social security number. I've never had that warning come up, and it's on my computer at this point. I was one of the test people internally, never had it come up, but I think that's largely because we have very good practices internally. We have never emailed full social security numbers. It's always been a prohibited practice here. Not that it hasn't happened, but somebody, it happens once, somebody's corrected, and it doesn't happen again, so it's not something we do. We don't have unencrypted information that goes out our doors. We don't take member information out of the building on laptops and the like if it needs to be accessed while somebody's out of the building. Say if one of the benefits officers is doing a retirement presentation and somebody asks a personal question, they can access TRS data by coming in through the Citrix application, which keeps the information inside TRS's doors and people don't take it away with them. I may be one of the biggest areas of concern for information going out of the building, because I'm the person who provides the responses to legal requests for information, subpoenas for information, that sort of thing. So, I go through documents, redact confidential information where it can be redacted and still be responsive to the subpoena. So, we manage those sorts of things. One of the changes in, I want to say it was in the 2015 legislative session, was an enhanced requirement for notifying certain people if we had a breach of our data system. And as John will go over this afternoon, we have a couple of issues to be concerned about if we have a breach of our data system in our incident response plan. But by state law now, we have to notify the Attorney General's office if we have had to notify people of a breach of a data system. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember. The Office of Consumer Protection. So, yeah, I didn't have it read far enough. So we have those additional notifications to make. Of course, the state carries, I shouldn't say of course, not all states do. Montana carries cyber security insurance for all state agencies. And one of the things that you have to be cognizant of when responding to a data breach is what the requirements are to trigger your insurance coverage and not to cause an unintentional waiver of your insurance coverage. So those issues have been dealt with in the incident response plan as well.
And can I
Absolutely.
interject just for a second? So I think we'll go over John was gonna present the incident response plan later, and then I'm also gonna talk about an electronic records in general here in a bit. Both of those things may result in some modifications to this policy, and this policy is really gonna be a more of an overarching, it's gonna be sort of growing in scope, I think. As a result of some of these other things that we're gonna talk about later. I just wanna mention, so like, upon discovery or notification, that where we say we're gonna notify right away, that's sort of contrary to what our instructions are for our insurance to take hold. I mean, notification would go out eventually, but it would be done by them, not by TRS. If we were to jump ahead of them and do that, it could cause us problems with our insurance. So those are some of the things that John will talk more in depth about, but there are going to be changes in this area coming forward in the August, October timeframes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's exactly right. Typically, we draft a policy like this broad enough to sort of not specify in granular detail the process that you follow, but to specify sort of the outcome. And of course, you know, statutorily, there is a requirement that if we can reasonably know or assume that somebody's data was breached, we have an obligation to notify them of that fact. When you notify them of that fact is not necessarily, oh, we think it happened, we pick the phone up and we call. So, you know, all of the steps that you have to have in between there are things that are included more in your incident response plan, because of course they do incorporate the considerations for your insurance coverage, notification of law enforcement if that's necessary, all of those kinds of things. So I will say on that point that it's my understanding that the few times that the state coverage has been invoked for data breaches, the company has done a spectacular job, is what I've been told. They've been very responsive. They're prepared to a great extent to provide your written notices to your members, you know, identify the people who need to be notified and that sort of thing. So to some extent, incident response is managed by our risk management office and their contracted coverage providers. So that's not an unhelpful thing. As Sean said, there will be an overarching policy. I'm not sure that it's this policy that will be the overarching policy. We have a number of things that now, after the 2015 session and the revised legislation, there are now substantial new body of regulations, guidance, form documents and that sort of thing issued by the Secretary of State's office to get in compliance with the new requirements. And as I sort of indicated earlier, we've created a small working group internally, John, myself, and Darla, our communications manager, because we're sort of the people with primary responsibility for data security, records management, Darla, and then policy and that sort of thing, primarily my area of responsibility. So we will be working on it and you will be seeing it. Any questions on the data security policy specifically?
Not so much on the policy, I just know that that was one of the big issues at the annual conference last year. And there's so many other balls in motion with all of this. It's hard to challenge around.
There are, and one of the issues with the state of Montana is that, of course, you have data security, and you have data security requirements, parameters, policies, that sort of thing issued by Department of Administration, primarily state ITSD. You have the records and information management requirements, and that administered and communicated from the Secretary of State's office. They don't necessarily require application of the same standards. ITSD uses NIST, Secretary of State's office uses ISO, but they deal with very much the same things, so, bringing it all together is not
easy.
It's not an uncomplicated process.
This whole threat just this week with the ransomware, what is our level of threat and what would be our response?
I will tell you that the ransomware is covered under the state cybersecurity policy as well. It's, I'm not exactly sure how you go around without responding to that.
A level of threat, I don't know how we would even guess. I mean,
Right.
we're a state agency, where everything now is housed and hosted by our state IT shop, so we're probably, for like a terror type of organization, we're probably up there, but no more up there than any other state in the country, I guess.
We had a ransomware attack within our school district in the last couple of months. And what's interesting about that is how they don't necessarily have to take your data to do anything.
No,
They just have
destroy
to,
it.
they just have to destroy
Encrypt
it.
it.
Yeah.
And how you link your backups and your other things together and how your formatting system goes with, I mean, it goes so deep that I couldn't follow it at all. But, literally being able to get to a point where you know you've got a problem and just walk over there and unplug the device from the wall so you don't have any additional things happen to your stuff is real.
And I would guess that
Very
Scott's
scary.
exactly right, how much you're imperiled potentially by a ransomware attack is dependent upon how good your backups are, how frequently they're done, and whether or not they're at risk as well from the attack. And I would guess that is one area where the state is well prepared and probably ahead of a lot of smaller kinds of organizations, because they have redundant systems and back everything up.
TRS is backed up daily, and we do have the redundancy in the Mile City data center. I mean, we are a long ways down that road, so. But you never know. Yeah.
Don't click on the wrong.
Right. Well, and I don't, John will speak more to it, more intelligently about it when it gets to the instant response plan. But there are times when, you don't go unplug it because you want to be able to forensically,
Be
I
able
mean,
to see what's going on, and
there's a lot.
sometimes
of this
unplugging
stuff.
it just took everything out of memory, and the only place it's worth looking at is in memory.
Right, yeah, so it's all complicated.
Double-edged sword.
And people don't, if they aren't doing it even unintelligently, you're around our school district administrators it was coming across as an administrator sent you this link, why would you not open it?
Right.
They send you things every day, you're like, oh, what is this? Uh-oh.
Well, I think the thing that, we still have a long ways to go, but the thing that it really reminds me of is we need to really think about what it is we're sharing and how we're sharing and what's going on with this stuff, and not be dependent on our information system being our email, because our email's
Yeah.
not the best way to, well, it is the best way to get messed up.
So that's another point worth pointing out, I think, at this point, now that I've said point 4 times, is that, in the past, there's been, there've been, I don't know, threatened lawsuits. I don't know if any of them have come about, but there was also the lawsuit against the state legislator over access to emails being, public records of the state of Montana. And in the past, everybody sort of understood that emails were public records, but only to the extent that you kept them. And you had the, ability to archive what you needed to archive and delete what you chose to delete. It is now not so much that way. In fact, it really is not that way any longer. The expectation is that if the record is created for a business purpose, it's a public record. And we have an obligation to manage it, retain it, archive it. There will be employee training, board training, that sort of thing on email practices and storage and archiving and that sort of thing, because it's now slid from being sort of an expectation of it's a record if you keep it as a record and it's not if you don't, to being it's a record and you better keep it. So, things will be, that's one of the first policies that will come under the new umbrella as well.
Okay. Thanks, Denise.
Mm-hmm.
So now we'll talk about those electronic records, huh?
Yes, so, Madam Chair, members of the board, on page 49, I didn't write a lot about this, and mostly I want to get you just thinking ahead on electronic records. So, what is driving this discussion is we were recently contacted by the Secretary of State's office, and we have been charged with, and we need to do this, we need to update our record retention schedule. Now, part of that consideration is that we have about 1,000 boxes right now in records management down in a warehouse, essentially. A lot of those boxes have already been imaged, they've been verified, and they've been 110% re-verified. So they are in FileNet, and we're certain, as certain as we can that they are. So a lot of them are down there, they're labeled imaged files. They're mixed, they're intermingled. There may be anything from a new member form in a box to a retirement application in a box to a beneficiary designation in a box. It's just, that day what came in, what got imaged, that's what's going to be in that box. So with that in mind, that we've been sort of tasked with, just saying permanent. Right now, a lot of those boxes are marked as we're going to keep them permanently forever. And when they come back to us now, so that's not necessarily acceptable. They're all marked image files. Why are you going to keep those paper documents permanently when you have them electronically? Administrative rule does allow for state agencies, and I included that in your packet on page 53. There is an administrative rule that allows agencies to designate the electronic record as the official business record of the agency, if we choose to do that. I think, looking at what we have coming ahead of us here at TRS, where we're going to be moving from FileNet to Perceptive, which is our imaging system, and the various workflow changes that's going to give us the ability to do. And Rex has actually conducted his training on Perceptive. John's he's doing his next week, I believe.
Yeah.
I saw it on his calendar. And just a little bit we know about it right now, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us to be more efficient with some workflow changes, where we get a document and we scan it right away as it comes in. And then instead of having hard copy folders that will get passed around the office, it'll all happen electronically. Once the verifier looks at that document and makes sure, yes, it was verified that it was scanned properly, and then it's re-verified in relatively short order within a few weeks of it getting to TRS. Once that re-verification is done, we can destroy that document rather than boxing it up, sending it down, and storing it, and paying for storage. There's a cost to us storing these documents that way. So I'm not going to say we have it all figured out right now. I just want to get sort of a general discussion and from the board, and sort of a like a nod that, yeah, that sounds like it makes sense that we should move that direction before, because there's a lot of work we need to put into this. Regardless of whether we decide to call the electronic record the official record, we're gonna have to sort through those hard documents we have and update our retention schedule for them. If we were to move the direction that I think we should, where we say the electronic records are the official record, at some point we would end up destroying a lot of those hard copies we have down there that have been imaged. And then we could come up with a plan for the remaining hard copies that are there that haven't been imaged of, you know, depending on how old they are and what our actual retention schedule ends up being. If it's, you know, 25 years after the death of a member, we no longer need to store any of those, because we need to have a retention schedule for the electronic document as well. It's not just hard copies, so you have to say, even all these documents that we have electronically down the road, you don't get to just keep them forever. You have to have a retention schedule. So maybe the appropriate retention schedule is 25 years after the last benefit's been paid on this member's account, we destroy all of the documents related to that member. Anyway, there's a lot of work to be done in that area. I think that that's the direction that TRS should move. I guess the point I was going to make is we'll once we've sorted through the hard copies we have and have gotten rid of the boxes that we don't need because they're already imaged, if that's the route we decide to go, then we'll develop a plan for those remaining boxes. Do we want to make a concerted effort to try to image all those documents, or depending on how old they are, it might make sense to not do that. Some of them we'll just be able to get rid of because they're just old accounting records that we don't need to keep. We just need to go through them. It's a daunting task. When you look at it, you know, you have, essentially 1,000 boxes in there. Some of them are marked pretty clearly based on the ledger we have. We can tell that they're accounting records. It should be pretty straightforward, but we're still gonna have to like make sure that's what's in that box before we tell them to destroy it. So there's a lot to it, yeah.
Being tied to some of that in the school district, I don't even know.
Yes, so I guess if the board, are there any questions about what it might mean to go that route? Or is there any sort of indication that might be helpful to me that seems to make sense to everyone to head down that road, and we'll start to do the work we need to get some policies in place.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we probably should. Seems silly that 1,000
Seems like
boxes
there'd
does sound dumb.
be a payoff in the long run to go in that direction. Perceptive is through the state.
That's the solution that the state has essentially said we have to go to for imaging, for content management.
And they will back up all the data a couple of times or whatever they do
Yes.
with everything else.
I'm getting the nod. Actually, yes, they will.
Rick says floppy disks
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so we do have, we have microfiche in the vault. We have a lot of records that are still on microfiche, and those have been, some of that has been imaged as we've had to do research. Our benefit officers or retired payroll staff will go in there, they'll pull that up on microfiche, print it, and then those printed documents get imaged under the member. But, you know, that's a decision point we'll have to make too, is does it make sense to have, you know, even if we have to augment our staff to do it, to spend the money to have all that stuff that's on microfiche actually converted to image documents that we can access from our desktops, instead of having that old machine in there that I didn't even know how it worked for about a month ago.
Yeah.
No,
It's kinda cool.
we still have one. It is really
Yeah.
cool, actually.
Yeah, we have
Look in
a
there.
lot of old microfilm as well, microfiche and microfilm that we use that machine for. That, you know, a lot of the refunds, the withdrawals, we get questions all the time. Well, you know,
I
as
used to work in
people,
Montana.
people get older, they forget that they withdrew back in, you know, the 70s or the 80s, and they question, and we have to go look in microfilm and find the refund and print off a copy of the withdrawal request and send them a copy, so, you know, prove that they do not have an account with us.
So you now have another job skill that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you thinking 25 years after the final benefit came? That seems like way too long to me. Why would we need to go that far with retention?
I just throw that out as, I haven't put a lot of thought into what that retention should be.
And I guess the question I had is comparable to that, and what you worry, I mean, for schools, there are some things we can't ever throw away, which in my mind is still somewhat crazy when they graduated in 1912. But
Right.
seriously,
Yeah,
I mean, we still have boxes of stuff from the 20s. But how does that apply when you're talking about some of this stuff? I mean, you have to keep names, do you have to keep something?
They have, in the statute and now in the administrative rules and that, there are categories of information. Agencies are required to inventory their records. So there are classifications like historical data is kept forever. And there's a definition of what's historical records, right? Now member case files essentially wouldn't be historical records, but that's a question. I mean, even after 25 years, is there a, possibility that there would be any reason to re-access that information? I can't imagine that we would ever do away with the fact that somebody has been a member.
no,
We would always keep a record that somebody was a member and some basic information, even at the time we close their account out and destroy the electronic records. Those are all things we'll have to determine but there is some guidance in the state statutes and administrative rules now about classifying your data. They have a much longer list of data types for record retention purposes, so you have to give it a number, you have to classify it under one of their classification codes, and that tells you how long it has to be kept, and so.
yeah, there's a lot to it and a lot of work that we're gonna have to do. It just makes sense if we have to do a majority of that work no matter what. And this is the point in time where it makes sense to make a decision so that we spend our time more wisely and we focus on an endpoint that is the electronic records or the official records. Like as far as a person, their sort of work history, what benefit they actually earned and was paid, that'll all be information that I have to imagine will always be maintained in the database, even for however long TRS exists. But all of those actual electronic versions of the documents we received on their behalf, their member forms, the benefit, after a certain length of time, since it's all electronic, we'll be able to run scripts that goes and they looks for, okay, anyone that has not had a benefit, the last benefit was paid on this, plus however many years, go delete all those, and you'll be able to remove those, just the image files.
I just think it's a little bit scary, and I'm sure you run into the same thing we run into, where business changes at various different times over the course of all of those years, and when we look at some of the stuff that we have to keep from those 1912 graduates, they didn't have things like transcripts back then. They had report cards. Well, so we have.
Yeah.
So
we have a report card for people from every year they were in school back in 1912, kinds of things, and where those are stored and how you.
this is off the beaten path, but do you know, as a public school district, do you fall under the state records management?
To some extent.
I'm wondering if you have the ability to file those historical records with the Historical Society and have them off your hands.
I don't know of any society that would want to have.
Well, the Montana
Some of
Historical
the stuff
Society
that I've
is
seen
the.
in our records.
Right, yeah.
But you're right, they'd be very interested in some of the electronic stuff,
Right.
if you would find a way to image that, but, we're just looking at, are we gonna image
Yeah.
report cards for these kids, we didn't have anything close to a transcript that we could just copy and say we got it till the 40s.
Yeah.
So we have all of this stuff that's way old.
Interesting.
And I would have to think you've got similar kinds of stuff.
Yeah, we do, and conversion of like the microfiche, microfilm to an image document that you know that you can file net or perceptive is, none of that's cheap either. And I think that there's a lot.
Well,
that needs-
you have the same verification requirements, you have the same.
And we're back researching refunds that happened 3+ years ago. I mean,
Well, I'm sure you will, because somebody worked when they were 22 and they're now 65 and they're trying to get their act together and
Yeah.
figure out what's going on.
Yeah, it's quite a process, but I mean, we're all very thankful we have those records, because we use them, we still use them.
Yeah.
Move on to legislative summary.
Yes.
I hope you
So-
No, you're not.
get support you need on
It's fine.
I guess I'm
We
taking.
really want you to do that job, Sean. That will be your task. How's that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot, definitely a lot. But it does make sense, because in some respects, it's sort of we've been nudged a little bit to update our retention, our records retention plan and document anyway, so it makes sense to, if we're gonna do it and we're gonna go through most of the work anyway, we may as well go the whole way and get everything,
at least where you want it now.
right. So we'll move that direction, that is helpful. Let's see. I think we have everybody here, so I might skip ahead.
That's fine.
Is that
Go
okay?
right ahead.
So I'd like us to skip ahead to the staff update section, which is on page 50. And what do they want to know? Lori did not come up this morning, but you all remember Lori. She originally started as the executive secretary here at TRS, and she recently has been promoted to a retired payroll benefit specialist position. So she's working now in the retired payroll section, and Lori's replacement is Shannon. So Shannon Buswell, just a few weeks ago, actually joined TRS as our new executive secretary. And so I think you've all probably had a chance to say hello to Shannon, but we're excited to have Shannon.
Have her in the corner over there.
Yeah.
She's not feeling well.
Oh, that's why she's sitting over there. Oh,
She
good for you.
wanted to get a little space.
I was wondering why she was in the corner. We all sit over there.
No, boy.
That's on my rightful place.
Thank you
Still
very
looking for a
much.
chair, too.
Yeah. And Shannon, you were at Allegiance, right? And so she worked in a pretty high-paced call center type of position where she had to explain the benefit or the insurance plan packages available, right?
Reimbursement
Yeah.
accounts, yep.
So she's been able to kind of hit the ground running to some degree, which is nice. And then we also have Dave Rao right here. That, for those of you that don't know, her and Tammy know each other. Dave is our new administrative assistant and quality control technician. So Dave does the verification of all those scanned documents that we were just talking about. And Dave recently retired as the undersheriff of Wilson Clark County. So we're excited to have Dave on board. He spends a part of his day at the front desk, answering phone calls and covering breaks and lunch hours for Shannon, and then the rest of the day he spends verifying our image documents. So, well, yeah, thank you. Welcome, Dave. And then Carla Shard, who just walked in. Carla announced that she's planning to retire after 36 years at TRS, right? And 40-some altogether. 40. What was it?
40.3 at the end
40,
of June.
40.3
Oh, wow.
altogether in state government. So we're sad to see Carla go for sure, but she's been great here at TRS, and I think she's hopefully has plans. We may try to talk her to come back for some MTRS testing in the fall. but-
There's no May.
I know
where you live.
Probably by May I'll be, or this fall,
Yeah.
I'll be ready to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get the summer off.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So
I'll be ready for another vacation.
Yeah, that's true.
no, I didn't need to do that. And then, I don't have it in your write-up, but at our last meeting, we knew that we were hiring Jessie. Jessie Hill is sitting back here, but she hadn't started yet with TRS. So Jessie is our newest benefit officer, so she works in conjunction with Janelle and Brand as benefit officers for TRS. And Jessie was formerly at Student Assistance Foundation, so she has a background in sort of servicing loans and so forth. And she's been able to get up to speed quickly and is already impacting our active membership portion of the staff. So,
Thank you. Welcome, all of you.
so lots of new faces, and Carla has insisted we don't have a party or a plaque or anything, but I didn't want her to come in so everyone could thank her for her service and wish her good luck. So.
Thanks to the board for the opportunity.
You're still getting a party.
Might have to kidnap her
Yeah.
after.
40 years with government. So
Yeah.
Wow.
Disabling car.
No, it's been a great ride.
Okay, thanks, Carla.
Thank you for your service.
Just wondering it.
Okay, Madam Chair, members of the board, the next agenda item is the legislative summary. You'll see on pages 54, 55, 56, and 57. The legislation that passed the legislature, this in the 2017 legislature, is all summarized there. I don't think it's probably necessary to go, item by item. The board is well aware of what was in our housekeeping bill, which was House Bill 67. That bill passed the legislature without any amendments whatsoever, so it's exactly as we asked for it to be. I guess I'll leave it up to you. You've all heard everything in that bill several times. Okay, I'll try to spend some more time on the bills that we didn't ask for and let you know where we're at with updates on those. House Bill 68, which was the bill that closes the loophole for the MUSRP participation. That bill also passed the legislature without any amendments, so pretty exactly as we asked for it. Then getting into the other legislation that wasn't requested by TRS but did pass the legislature, Senate Bill 115 revises stipends for National Board certified teachers, and what the bill itself did was it changed the frequency of the stipends as well as the state-funded amount of those stipends. So previous law, there was a one-time only payment from the state for National Board certification. I think it was $3,000. Senate Bill 115 changed that to ongoing payments, and it's up to $1,500 for National Board certification for anyone, and up to $2,500 for people that serve in high poverty areas. So, and then the most pertinent thing to TRS is they went right into 1920-101 and they changed our definitions to stipulate that any payment made pursuant to 20-4134, which is the National Board's certification statute, are not reportable to TRS. So I've been working on, and with the help from Denise and with Darla, on language that we'll send out to employers. It wasn't the legislature's intent to, I don't believe, to make the funding that districts have been paying already to, I'll back up just a little bit. Some districts already pay, and they have built into their collective bargaining agreements or their salary matrices ongoing annual payments that are not funded at all with this state funding that we've already looked at and we've said, yes, that meets the definition of earned compensation because it's their payments that you're planning to make for multiple years and it's reportable to TRS. I don't think this bill, and the bill doesn't have language that tries to reach out and say that any of that's not reportable. So the way we're going to communicate to our employers on that bill is that if it's paid pursuant to pursuant to 20-4-134, it's not reportable to TRS because that's what the law says. But if they're ongoing payments, they may be reportable, and we already have some pretty good language built for this. And I can read it to you once I find it. Stipend, so it'll say, the definition of earned compensation in 101 was amended to clarify that teachers' stipends paid pursuant to this law are not reportable to TRS as earned compensation. This means the state fund portion and the employer matching portion of the stipend paid pursuant to 20-4-134 is not reportable to TRS. And please note, a stipend, incentive, or bonus paid outside of the provisions of 20-4-134 may be reportable to TRS as earned compensation provided it's paid as part of a series of annual payments as provided in our administrative rule. So there's a little bit more to it.
So when they get a stipend from their district, it will be reportable. When they get a stipend from the state, it will not. Is that what I'm understanding?
It is. So the maximum match amount that the employer has on their side for either the $1,500 or the $2,500 National Board Certification stipend is $500. Anything they pay outside of that, if they have it already built into their contract, which some of them do, if they pay up to 20% of their base contract as additional wages ongoing for National Board Certification. If they have it built in that way, or if they have it built in as a line item under the matrix where every National Board Certified teacher gets $3,000 or $4,000, whatever it might be for that district, but it's funded and paid for outside of 20-4, whatever, 130, 20-4, 134. We're not going to take issue with it. I mean, our instructions are pretty specific, but they're not specific to the point where we're telling the district exactly how to do it. If they have it as ongoing compensation, they should report it to us. And if they have any questions about it, they need to contact TRS. And that's what the instructions to employers will say. So anyway, I mean, overall, I think Senate Bill 115 is a good thing. I mean, it instead of being a one-time payment, it's an ongoing payment for folks that keep their board certification updated and recertified. So TRS was aware that they had that language in there to make it not reportable to TRS, the state portion of it, but we chose not to go up and testify on that bill just because we didn't want to be we didn't want it to be perceived that we were trying to get in the way of these stipends for teachers that get their board certification. And I still think that was the right move. I don't think we should have been up there obstructing that bill from getting through. So
I think it makes far more sense that if MEA wants to make a change in that and it makes sense for us, that we support that in the future.
Yeah, I
Just-
agree.
If I might add something, we didn't intend to have that in the bill, it was amended
It was.
in
And
order to get it passed, so it wasn't our idea to do that, but
right.
he still wanted the bill, so.
Was it because it was gonna add more to really truly more, because the district would have to give more contributions and
There were
how it was more?
legislators that didn't want that to be paid, that didn't want that to be included, so that's what we, kinda like the GABA, got put in the bill, we didn't want it in there, but it got put in, so we continued to support it, but wasn't our thoughts at the
Right,
time.
and we can see, we'll monitor this, I guess, in the next couple of years and see how it impacts TRS from an administrative standpoint. How often are districts having trouble with this, and then it may be something that we propose, that we get rid of that exclusion in our definitions at some point in the future.
I can sure see issues with some people wondering why is this the number you're using for my 3-year average when in fact I've been getting
This,
this, and
Absolutely.
I could see the problem. with that.
Yeah, me too, and
That's true.
we very well may have districts that report the whole thing, even the state funded portion for, some length of time that we're unaware of, and then they come back and say, well, we really shouldn't have been reported, we want a refund on that. It could get messy, so.
Yeah, I can see the
It's-
district,
it's-
they've
it's a
taken
problem.
the
It's-
state
it's
funds that they've been paying and actually reducing what they're paying to
But the
TRS.
general concept of the bill was awesome and interesting,
It's gonna be messy for a
but
couple
it's
years.
messy. I just wonder, why do you know what this is?
So anyway, I think we're in a good place on that bill as far as what we'll communicate out, and we'll be able to implement that change. The next big change was Senate Bill 121, which provides that bona fide volunteer positions are not reportable to TRS, and so we're working on an updated volunteer fact sheet. I guess I'll kind of segue into item C. So all of these changes, every 2 years we have the legislative changes come through. Even this session where it was a relatively ho-hum session, there weren't a ton of bills that were passed that affect TRS. Just even these look through that we have, where you have the volunteers, you have the stipends, you have all the few things in our housekeeping bill, like the extra duty service credit. These things all impact so many of the documents that we have out there. Our employer handbook needs updates, our member handbooks need updates, our benefit recipient handbooks need updates, various fact sheets need updates. So I guess my point is, once we get through a legislative session, it is a very busy time for our communications manager, certainly, because they're the ones that are writing a lot of these updates, but also the rest of your management staff and other staff that have to go through all these various documents and figure out where all do we need to make these updates and review those changes, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We're in the process of reviewing and updating all that documentation, just as a kind of a heads up. I will tell you on Senate Bill 143, which is the revising the return to work provisions in 1927-32. That bill passed the legislature, and it was just yesterday finally transmitted to the governor. So the governor's 10-day clock starts yesterday, and that's the bill that TRS has asked for a veto on because it reduces the number of years of credible service necessary to work with no adjustment to your benefit. And no limit on what you can earn from 30 years to 27 years. So we have asked for a veto of that bill. And I'll let you know as soon as I know something. Are there any questions about any of the bills? I mean, we have a pretty good summary of each bill in the packet. Like I said, most of these we've talked about at length over and over, it seems like at this point. We started our housekeeping bill, it seems like we've been dealing with it for 2.5 years because we have been dealing with it for 2.5 years. No? Okay. Alright, I think I'll move on to item number C then, which is communications, and I sort of already touched on this topic. There's a couple things I want to talk about here, but essentially, like I said, every time our legislature concludes, if there are any substantive changes that were made to our laws, it requires a lot of updating, and I think we're getting more sophisticated about how we handle our documentation so that in the future, I mean, we're reaping a little bit of those rewards right now, but in the future it'll need to be better, where most of the detail things related to TRS law and policy and administrative rule that our members need to know about are contained now in fact sheets, which is good because then, as you have little things change in the statute, you can go update the fact sheets, but maybe the overarching statement that was in the member handbook or the benefit recipient handbook doesn't need to change. So I think we're moving in the right direction there, but with that said, we're not all the way there yet, so we don't cover everything in fact sheets yet. We're headed that direction, but long story short, Darla is very busy, and I just want the board to be aware that we are working on getting our active member handbook updated, our benefit recipient handbook updated, and our employer manual updated. The employer manual has been ongoing, it's been in process now for quite some time, and Darla, I know, is getting, she's done a lot of work on it, and it's getting close to the point where it will be up to date. And it'll be available online for all of our employers. I have a write-up in your packet starting on the bottom of page 49 and going through page 50. And this is a discussion point that we should probably have. At the conclusion of the last legislative session, I brought some information to the board, and we made some decisions that we weren't gonna send a new handbook to all 19,000 active members or all 15,000 benefit recipients. That instead we would send handbooks to a subset of that group. And so I guess I would propose that we do the same thing this next interim. And instead of sending a handbook to all the active members, we would send them to all new hires over the next 2 years, which is approximately 2,000 members. And then all active members that are age 45 years or older and have 5 or more years of service credit, so that essentially they're vested in their 45 or older. And that will come out to be approximately 10,500 members. And that's what we did last session, and we just recently ran out of the active member handbooks that we ordered with that order. So that's just about right. We don't want to have a surplus of them this time of year because the session just got over and we need to get these new updates out. And then obviously we'll still have an electronic version of this handbook available. We will note in our newsletter that there's updated handbook available, as well as we'll summarize the legislative changes in the newsletter anyway. I guess.
When you note it in the newsletter, will you also note who is being sent an actual handbook so that people realize I'm not getting one based on what's in the newsletter?
Yeah, I mean, we could do that. I'll have to think about how that's going to cause more questions than answers or not, because I don't know that we would announce I mean, we can't. Let me think about that.
I don't know.
We could announce
I just
that
was
we're going to send
curious.
them to these subsets of groups, and then and provide them the option if they want. I don't know if we want to go down that road if they want to request one, because then we might get
Yeah, we would run short,
I
because
mean,
we do have some
ultimately-
employers that call and request additional handbooks, just because they want to pass them out to all the staff, and so I
Yeah.
can see that being a problem.
Okay.
I don't think we're at a point yet where I want to be to really roll this out, but ultimately what I would like to see us do is have a very simple plan document that everyone receives, and then everything else is electronic, because it in some ways it doesn't make sense.
Well, and
I
think
can't say it
nowadays-
doesn't make sense. It seems to make less and less sense to have these hard handbooks that essentially are no good 2 years after you print them.
Yeah.
And nowadays, when you do want to know something, I just go right to your website. I don't know where my handbook is, and that's typically what
I think
happens.
it really makes a difference as to the substantial nature of the change too. I mean, if you're looking at some of the things that we did 2 sessions ago, that's kind of a big deal.
Tier 1,
It
tier
is.
2, yeah.
It is, but even
But
this
now
session where you have the volunteer, I mean, we have all kinds of documentation out there that talks about how you can't volunteer during the 150-day break, and even after the 150-day break, your employer has to impute value for that, report you to.
True, but for the teacher that's got 10 years of vested service, that means nothing.
Right,
It's
for
it's
a
truly
lot of our
only, it's
active,
truly only
right.
for the person that's getting ready to retire.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So,
We can revisit that.
yeah, and like I said, I'm not opposing anything like that just yet, but I think that is kind of down the road, maybe a direction we could,
Here were the
we
changes.
could look at, yeah.
Here is the thing.
Yeah, because honestly, thinking about the 2,000 new hires, vast majority of those are electronic generation anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, they are. But there are, especially when you start looking at the benefit recipient handbook, there are a lot of them that aren't necessarily electronic generation, have access to it, but a lot of them are too. More these days. So I guess we'll jump to that paragraph then. And on the benefit recipient handbook, what I would propose is that we order enough of them to cover anyone that started receiving a benefit in the last 3 years, plus enough for next year. We don't want to order, 600 or 700 for the fall of 2019 because it would be, or not fall, the spring of 2019 because it would be the same timing as right now, where a session would just be concluding, and we could potentially be sending out bad information. So I have a count there of 3,600 from 2014 to 2017, which includes about 1,200 retirees that are out there working under their 1/3 earnings limit. Really, your recent retirees and your working retirees are the ones that most need to know about the changes to the benefit recipient handbook. Everyone else, if they've been retired for 15 years and they're not working, they're not changing anything, they don't really need to be aware of these other changes, at least not the whole handbook. We will, like I said, the newsletter will have information that lets everyone know that there's an updated handbook for benefit recipients, an updated handbook for active members, and also an updated employer manual.
Madam Chair and members, I'm still here. I have a question.
All right.
Could we ask Diane Flatmo her opinion on this? Given the fact that the handbook is completely available on the website, I'm wondering, is it maybe necessary to send it in hard copy to these new hires?
Thank you, Dan, for asking my opinion. I do think there is some value. I think new teachers and new classified folks, pairs are overwhelmed sometimes when they first start a job, and they may not be well aware at all of what benefit they have. And so if they have a hard copy, they'll at least be aware, have a place to go. I'm comfortable with giving an option to folks and say, here it is electronically, but you don't have emails to do that, right? You don't collect emails, do you?
Right.
Yeah, some of them we do. It depends on if it's available as part of their uploaded file.
So they may not have all the information they need to notice folks otherwise. I still think there's a value to it. Now, that may not continue as time goes on. In my experience,
thank you.
people need to know as much about their retirement system as they can, and they don't, even with the handbook now. Carrie's shaking her head. Carrie probably knows every bit as much as I do. What do you think?
I think that they have all of that stuff and they keep it for a while. I think it's beneficial. I think when they get it, they put it in there, and because I work with the new teachers in the district, by the second year, they're asking us about the handbook, they're bringing it to us. So, not the first year, but they have it. They have it in their grasp. So I do think it's important that they
Thanks. I know it's money.
Okay, so essentially we'll be following the same approach that we did 2 years ago, as far as who's going to get updated handbooks and how many we're in order. That's my plan. That's what we built into the budget. I guess if the board thinks I should do something different, then now would be a good time to bring that up. Okay, great. All right, we already did the staff update. Madam Chair, members of the board, we're on to item number D under Executive Director's Report, number 2, which is the alternative work schedule. And this is essentially an information item for the board. For Dan Chamberlain, for your information, I guess TRS has our policy on alternative work schedule, and essentially what that means is in the summer, from the first Monday following Memorial Day to the last Friday before, Labor Day.
Yep.
We've in the past allowed TRS staff members to alter their work schedule for summer, and keeping in mind that we need to have coverage from 8 o'clock in the morning essentially to 5 o'clock at night. And so Tammy has done the work essentially to put this schedule together. And it's not something the board needs to adopt necessarily, it's just an information item. So this is the schedule for this summer. Some people don't change their schedule at all, while others will work 4 10s or 4 9s and 4 hours on Fridays. It just depends on what works best for them. But it was I think initially when this was started, wasn't really the downtime of the year. It's not like it's a downtime, but it was intended to help alleviate burnout,
Morale.
and help with morale. And a lot of our staff members do take advantage of that, so that's what we're proposing to do this summer.
Is there any public comment to all of those discussion items, Diane, that didn't come up before?
Thank you.
All right.
Quiet for a change.
So legal counsel's report, we haven't had a lot of that lately, so maybe you're gonna load on us now, huh?
No, actually.
Oh, good.
So still the only contested case issue we have going on is the Ed Zabrocki matter, Yellowstone Academy Elementary School District number 58. You're all aware that it was scheduled for a 4-day hearing, May 2nd through 5th. It ended up being about a 1.5-day hearing on May 3rd and 4th. All I can give you is a procedural update because of course the ex parte communications prohibition still applies. So after a hearing, we now have a post-hearing schedule that takes us through the middle of October. So at the earliest, you will be seeing a proposed decision from the hearings examiner sometime between Halloween and Christmas, I would say. And that is assuming that there are no interim appeals of preliminary determinations of that as well. So we continue.
Were our attorneys present for this as well? No, okay. I don't mean you, but
The Drake law
the Drake law firm,
No,
they were not, okay.
No. So that's about it. No other contested cases at this
It's
point.
been good for a while. I will-
Yeah,
No information.
I think the ex parte communication applies to me as well, right?
It does.
So I can't say much about it either, but it was not one of my favorite things to do. Okay.
So John, we're on to the IT manager report, incident response plan. We're hearing a lot about this.
Very exciting stuff. Madam Chair, members of the board, starting on page 61, I had a draft copy of this incident response plan, and I don't know if you had a chance to read through it, or should I go through it?
We have. Has everybody had a chance to read through it?
Okay. So, I spent quite a bit of research on coming up with a plan. Obviously, the need for a plan is, we hear a lot about incidents involving corporate or government data. We see it in the news all the time. And in the security world, they say it's not a matter of if, but when. And it's not a very savory thought, but I mean, it's probably a reality. So the idea is to be prepared, and be prepared on how we're going to respond and what we're going to do if we ever detect that something bad has happened to our system. And in my research, I found very, very, very detailed and specific plans that were step-by-step procedures if a system were to get hacked and somebody were to steal information, like we've heard about, like what happened with Target or something, where information is stolen from teachers' retirement, and we have to deal with that. But really, an incident response, as the more I researched it, seemed to be, there were a lot of things that can happen that are bad to TRS that would impact us, that not necessarily involves stealing of our data. So I thought an approach that was a little bit higher level and more encompassing to what would happen if our systems all went down, what would happen if we had a compromised, like a malware attack with ransomware that encrypted all of our files, didn't necessarily steal our data, but encrypted all of our data and required us to respond to that. The responses to those situations are different than when all of our data is stolen and we have to get in touch with 30,000 members and let them know that our data has been compromised. So I wanted to come up with a plan that was more of a larger scale. This is what we should do if something bad happens, and it can be something as simple but catastrophic as major system failure, to something as not so simple and unsavory as actual attacks, stealing of our data, and where our systems are compromised and we find out about it and we need to address those situations. So I came up with a plan that's in your packet. We do have some kind of the common theme that I found in a lot of plans and in toolkits to develop response plans, data breach, or information technology incident plans, really revolved around having a specified team to respond and steps that team would take to initiate a rapid response. So obviously that's a little vague, but then the idea here is as soon as something untoward happens, and in the definitions that are definition of incident, you can see that it says it's a single or series of unwanted or unexpected information security events that result in harm or pose a significant threat of harm to information assets. And I think the key is and require non-routine preventative or corrective action. So really what happens is somebody identifies that something has happened to our system that's out of the ordinary. We get a log report, we get a flag, a firewall, the ITSD, the state contacts us and says, hey, we see some traffic coming through the firewall that's hitting your mTrust server. That type of an incident, this is non-routine, we need to do something to fix it and it's out of the ordinary. That type of thing happens, we've pulled together the incident response team, which is spelled out in here who that incident response team is. We take a look at what the report is, what is being reported to us, it's happening. Determine the threat level, determine is this a software malfunction, is it a hardware malfunction, does it seem like it's an attack, and if we need to know more, recruit resources starting with the State IT Services Division. Bring people on board that can look at their firewall logs and system logs. They can bring more resources than TRS has to the table. Start analyzing and really trying to drill down here. Because one thing we don't want to do is overreact to an incident that turns out it's not a data breach, but announce to the world that we had a data breach, because that can be just as catastrophic as an actual data breach. So incident response team's responsibility is to identify what has happened, and I kind of laid that out in a, detect and identify, and then inspect and classify. And the idea is once we've identified that something has happened, classify what it is, take appropriate response. And if it turns out we do have a malicious, intentional attack on our systems where somebody's trying to come in and steal something from us, the Risk Management and Tort Division from the Department of Administration has defined procedures through their insurance carrier of what a state agency is supposed to do. And at that point, the incident response team would engage Risk Management and Tort Division or Risk Management and Tort Defense Division to come on board and to come alongside and actually bring their resources to bear. And the state has an example, unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, but unfortunately overall, of this actually happening when Health and Human Services became aware of the fact that a server was had been compromised by a malicious attacker from outside. And the insurance carrier for the state came on, brought its resources to bear, and not only did they bring in the financial resources to notify all the people that needed to be notified, but the forensic and investigative resources to actually find out and truly identify exactly what happened, who it was, how to stop it, and how to fix it.
And that was all paid for by the insurance.
That's correct. It was that all those resources came into the insurance. So the idea of the plan here was not to come up with a ABCD list of steps that we would take if we found out that we had gotten hit with ransomware. I wanted to have a list that was, if we determined that ransomware, that a server compromise happened, that we had actually had some of our data stolen, if we had major system failure, a way to respond in all those cases and put together a response team that would be able to handle that and ultimately get us back up and running as fast as possible. And to the last section in this plan specifically speaks to the fact to then benefit from the experience, because unfortunately these things could happen, but if they do, maybe we can take away something from it and improve our system because of it. I mean, and so that last section in there talks about in the event that we have an incident, there are some steps that need to be done by the incident response team, and that is fact finding and lessons learned, and really trying to understand what went wrong and what we need to do to fix it. Because unfortunately, in the IT world, or in all aspects of the world, especially in the IT world, IT folks, we always think that we understand how things work, but until we really step out and think outside the box, we don't anticipate what some of those vectors of attack or failure can be, because it's outside the way we design the systems to work. So when a bad thing does happen, we need to take advantage of that and say, wow, I never even considered that avenue, and we need to do this to fix it. We need to make sure it never happens again. So I wanted to make sure we had some language in the plan there as well. So the last piece that I think is probably really worth mentioning from my point is that this incident response plan, in my opinion, is an initial step. And I think it absolutely calls for additional procedures and programs to come alongside of it. And one is, this is a response when an incident's identified. I think the very next step for us is to put pieces in place to identify incidents. And that's monitoring and detection. And right now we kind of rely on the fact that somebody calls up and says, hey, M-Trust is down, the website's down, or the state tells us something bad has happened. I think it would be ideal for TRS to be a little bit more proactive and to daily review logs, or to have systems in place that are doing some review for us, to let us know that something happened yesterday that we haven't seen happen in a long time, so that we can go in and start taking a look at it. I think from a responsibility to our membership and to the resources that we're managing, that we should be doing a little bit more, and so I got that as a task for myself. Next is to put into place monitoring and analysis of our data and our systems, so that we can, I'd like to be the first one to ever be aware. I think that would be ideal.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this has been talked about before, but I think this kind of fits under a larger umbrella policy just in general of information security, information awareness here at Teachers Retirement System. So, but I do believe it's a good start, and I think that as the plan stands now, or maybe with some tweaks and changes to it, it's a good place for us to be. It gives us a defined response activities that we can do when something happens. Probably going through an exercise, a tabletop exercise, where we go through a simulated incident and put this plan into effect, will probably show some missing pieces and some shortfalls that I can add in later. So I would like to plan out to do a tabletop exercise. Finding time to do that with a staff that is 100% busy all the time could be a bit of a challenge, but I would like to work that in sometime in the next few months. Any questions?
These are things we just assume are happening, or we don't have a clue that could even happen, so we appreciate hearing about them.
When you're doing like a daily review to see if there's been an abnormal incident, how long would that take on a daily basis?
Well, the idea is servers have, all of our servers have significant capability to log transactions. Out of the box, the way a system comes up is some really basic logs are created, changes to the system, that are coming out of the box, because there's a cost benefit ratio when you're dealing with auditing and logging. Kind of like auditing and logging of our systems here, is it costs a lot of money to do it, but there's a benefit to be derived from it. The more logging and auditing we turn on any of our information systems impacts performance. And so the cost there is that we either chuck more money at it to build a more robust system to help drive the auditing and logging, but at some point, it's selecting the types of logs and auditing we want to do on each one of our information systems. So it's not across the board. I would say the mTrust server should have specific types of logs, who's accessing it on a daily basis, so we can go down through the log file and say that all of these user IDs accessed the system yesterday or today, and look for, I don't recognize that number. I mean, and so a very specific log file for the mTrust server. At the database level, which is hosted by TSD for us, they can enable logging for us that will tell us every type of transaction that's taking place on the server. We know who's accessing the database, but we don't have good visibility into all the transactions that are being done at the database. So if we enable full logging, we would probably double the load on the database and hurt performance. But it would be nice to know if there were any really large data dumps, or if there were any data change updates, what are called CRUD operations, create, update, create, read, update, delete operations on the data, and actually log out what the user ID was and what that operation was, and then look for anomalies. Do I not recognize the user ID, or why was 50,000 records queried out? I mean, we don't have, if we know that there's some reports in mTrust that generate 50,000 records, we would expect that. But if we look at a select query that was run against our database for 50,000 record dump, and we don't see any reports generated from mTrust the day before, that's an anomaly. That's something that needs to be looked at. And so it's establishing and enabling these logs and making and then evaluating how it impacts performance and looking at that cost benefit ratio. But I think to answer your question is, if the logging is appropriate and specific, that it would be a 15 to 30 minute role for operations IT staff to look at every day. And if we split it between the two of us, maybe if Rex were to look at server logs, I was to look at the database logs and look through there, and I think we could write some queries or some searches and finds in like Excel or Word that would actually look for user IDs that aren't in a known list, so that we could quickly scour through a log file and look for these types of anomalies. I think periodically we'd want to do some real detailed analysis, initially for sure, because as the data starts coming through, it could be a 10,000 line log file, and really look at that it's very verbose in the fact that the same user keeps accessing the database, so filter that out and look for the ones that are different. But I think in a short period of time, come up with a pretty good routine, a relatively rapid look at, and I think it would be good due diligence on our part to say daily we're looking at who's accessing our servers, and daily we're looking at what type of operations are being executed on our database server, and to have these queries that we're looking at for these log files to look for the things that are outside the norm. And then we look at the log files, something pops up, it may or may not be an incident, but as the plan details, operations staff, which is IT, we would look at that and say 150,000 records were queried out of the database yesterday, and there were no reports run in mTrust that would generate 150,000 record dump. We probably need to go talk to management or the incident response team and start looking at this. And so in that respect, we pull the incident response team together. We may look at it for 30 minutes, talk to the folks at ITSD, and determine that, yeah, that was actually a query that was done by our developers in something, or maybe we talk to them and it turns out it is a non-incident.
Right.
But I think the plan allows for us to do that without, like I said, overreacting. And but we want to be able to react quickly, efficiently, and I think the more proactive we can be, it's, from a responsibility standpoint to our membership and for TRS, is a good thing.
Excellent. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So we're just down to applications and benefit adjustments, it looks like.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we retired 54 individuals during these past 3 months. course, that's not a huge volume, but of course, we are not in our busy time of year. The next report you will receive from us in August will encompass the predominant volume of retirees that we average of 600 plus retirees a year. And the majority of them retire in May, June, and July, predominantly June and July. And so we're in the process of loading all those applications now, so. Busy. We have to be busy.
Do we wanna quickly close the meeting and do the, because we only have one disability?
Two.
We have two, where they're not, you don't
They're
think
not
they're
coming,
coming
no.
in person?
No,
We could if you want.
We can, are you guys okay with that?
Yeah, so
That doesn't take long anyway, but it just gives us a little bit more time to get back.